Hey guys, Chris from Provo Beast Audio Installation, and in today's video we're going to be installing a doubled-in radio on this 1999 Jeep Grand Cherokee. Now in this video we're going to show you how to remove whether it's the current existing aftermarket or factory radio. We'll head over to the bench, show you the parts we need to do a doubled-in this location. We'll show you everything we need to do to modify the dash to accommodate that doubled in, and then from that point forward we'll get everything reinstalled. So, without further ado, let's get started. Now, before we show you the parts that we're going to need, we need to get the current equipment out. Now, in this case, it would either be the factory DIN and a half or single DIN. Now, it looks like this is a single DIN with a floating radio that somebody installed at some point, but the radio itself is missing, the screen. So, it all has to come out. You'll need a panel tool and a Phillips screwdriver. We have a driver that'll help us complete that task. Now, our panel is actually just held on with clips, so hence using a panel tool, it makes it really easy. Just like that. For Phillips, give it a pull. All right, disconnect your harnesses. So we disconnected our harnesses here. Now, since the radio is already aftermarket, there's a little bit more wiring in there than you'd probably expect, but what you should be able to see if you're doing a factory radio are your two main gray and black plugs, as well as your antenna adapter. So that's really all we need to focus on at this point in time. You may have also a little separate ground here, and that's fine too. So at this point of time, with the radio removed, let's head over to the bench to show you the parts we're going to need for our new radio. Alright, so here on the bench, first and foremost, the radio that we've chosen to go with is this Pioneer AVH G225BT. Very basic doubled-in radio, but it does include CD and DVDs. To accommodate this, because we are basically doing a doubled-in and a DIN and a half location, we need to modify the current dash setup. Now, the Metra kit that we're going with to help us do that is the Metra 95-6546B. Essentially here, it takes that existing dash bezel, and what we're going to do is convert it to a doubled-in. We have to remove our vents so we can place them in our new kit, but this really is that solution to put that screen in your factory location. Now, your model may or may not have steering wheel volume controls, and ours does. So we are going to be using the SWI RC-1 by Pack Audio. Essentially here, this will allow us to keep those buttons working with this new radio. Now, you'll need a wiring harness adapter. This wiring harness adapter will plug into the factory plugs, and the other ends will plug into the harness that came with the radio. What we'll do is actually solder these up color for color, and we'll walk you through that process here in a moment. Finally, because we're doing a Pioneer, and for settings and video playback, while not just when the parking brake is pressed, we have a micro bypass. Now, we're not going to cover this in depth. We already have a video on that on the channel. We'll link that down in the description for your convenience. So at this point in time, what we're going to do is grab our wiring here, and then our steering wheel control wiring, start prepping everything. We're going to strip all our wires back so we can prepare to get those soldered up. So what we've done here is we stripped both ends. We have our wiring harness adapter and our Pioneer wiring harness, and we've stripped both ends on both sides, and essentially, like I said, we're just going to be matching colors. We also have to add in, since we have steering wheel volume controls, the harness here that requires power, ground, and accessory, which is the black, red, and yellow that will tie into all these. And we're doing our micro bypass. So what we're going to do is put heat shrink on our wires before we start soldering them up. Once those connections cool, we'll move those heat shrink tubes up and over those connections, and we'll shrink them down with the heat gun. Alright, so we went ahead and soldered up our wires, just color for color. So our steering wheel control module harness needs power, ground, and an accessory wire, which is black, red, and yellow. So we have a big collection of black wires, which is our grounds. We have 2 grounds off, One ground goes to the chassis because there's not a ground in our harness. And then the other ground is going to, there's a flip down DVD monitor in the back that will actually hook this one up to. So we got kind of all our grounds together, and then our micro bypass needs a ground. That's why everything is soldered in all as one. Put some heat shrink over. So those are our grounds. Now our accessory, or a red, there's a power antenna circuit. There's not a motorized antenna, but we want to hook up the amplified antenna circuit, which is that blue one. So we tied that into our red, just into accessory. So it'll be powered when the radio is on. And then that goes into there. And then again, our steering wheel control harness requires a red wire, which we tied into. And we also added another accessory off for that flip down monitor or backup camera or anything down the road. So we also got another one in there. And then finally, our steering wheel control module requires a constant 12 volts, which is yellow. So we got that in there and just tied it in. And then, as you see, we have all our heat shrink, which we just move up and over those connections there. And then everything else is just color for color. So what we're going to do is move our heat shrink up and over those connections, and then we'll shrink them down with a heat gun. Alrighty, so our wiring is all done. Now for our steering wheel control wiring, so we hooked up power ground and accessory, but what's also needed is there's a secondary black in that harness as well as a white wire. We actually have to go tap these wires into the steering column. So we'll have to show you how to take apart the steering column so we can run those wires over there. All the other wires except for these two and the other black, red, and yellow wire, we just taped off. We don't need it in our install today. So with that being said, looking at the module itself, according to a Pioneer in the Jeep Cherokee, Jeep Grand Cherokee, here's our dip switch configuration. We have 1 is off, 2, 3, 4, and 5 is on, 6, 7, 8 is off, and then on the secondary side, 1, 2, 3 are on, and then 4 is off. The way we figure that is you go to pack interfacing, it's SWI RC-1, you go to that page and then you can look up the wiring diagram configuration based on your radio. But at least for a Jeep Grand Cherokee with a Pioneer, that is our setup. Harness is all nice and clean. This end plugs into our Pioneer. We have our micro bypass. We left our backup camera wire out just in case we added one. These ends plug into the car. This is our steering wheel control end that goes off. Since we have a flip down DVD screen already in there, we left a power and ground out that will connect in. We actually also added a remote turn on wire in case we had an amplifier down the road. And then this is our main ground, which we added a bullet connector on. So this other end will crimp into the factory ground back behind the radio. That's why we have that on there. So harness is done. Now let's turn our attention over to our radio. Now this is the new dash kit. This is the old dash kit. As you can see, this accommodates the double din. It's not going to be the wood grain, but it's the best we got to allow us to make this install happen. Now we do have to transfer our vents over to the new kit itself. So what we're going to do is actually grab the instructions that came with our dash kit. It also shows you how to remove the original radio, but it has a kit preparation. So essentially here we have to grind or cut away the factory welds that are holding on our factory vents. And then next we have to trim the top of the vents just to make a little space for the double din. And then finally, once we get everything assembled to the new kit, then we have to go actually in the car and make a slight modification to the sub dash to allow this double din to fit in the factory location. So without further ado, let's start working on this kit. We can see where this needs to go in. You can see how this kit will bind up if we don't trim it. So what we're going to do is mark where we need to trim, and then we're going to notch out this little edge. Okay, so between files, Dremels, and a little teeny hand saw, we notched this out. See that there? We sanded it down so it's nice and smooth, nice and even. We didn't go too deep into the vents itself. And this actually now fits really well right in that location. So what we'll do is use a little bit of super glue or even a little bit of hot glue and get the mounted up to those mounting points. Alright, so we got our kit all done. It's actually went in nice and clean. Got it all glued in there as well. Nice and solid as one piece. Got the wingies on the side. Now you may have to do some adjustment here to get those positioned, but depending on the radio, because it may be in or out. So don't be totally set on where these are mounted. You may have to adjust the brackets in or out just so it sits flush in there, sits all the way flush in the dash. So at this point of time, besides hooking up our 2 wires in our steering column, we're ready. Let's head over to the car and start getting everything installed. Now before we totally get the radio buttoned up here, we wanted to show you the modifications. So we cut this total upper brace out. This used to have that loop down there and this panel up above, which is now gone. We cut that all out per the instructions. Just take your time. At this point, with that all cleared out of the way, the radio should be able to sit nice and flush. Alright, so we're back here in the car. Now we are ready to start getting everything reassembled. So with our wiring harness adapter, nice thing is it is all color coded. So we're going to plug our gray harness in. We're going to plug our black harness in. We put a bullet connector and we're going to connect to that factory ground. Plug that on in as well. Perfect. Now this guy here, this is for the flip down screen. It was installed previously. You won't have that in your install, but we did hook that up to power and ground as well. Now, steering wheel controls, big thing here. So we fed this through and you'll see that I've already taken apart the steering column here. I'll get you in closer to show you how to make the connections, but we fed the white wire from our steering wheel control module and the secondary black wire, which we showed you on the bench as we prepared. We fed it through the dash and out through the steering wheel column here, and we're going to connect it into some wiring here. So again, we'll get there in a minute. We'll bring you in closer to show you how we make those connections, but all we did was just feed it through the dash. We'll fed it out here and we'll go from that point. But for the radio side, what we're ready to do is start making our final connections, getting everything installed. So we're going to grab our radio. Let's get it plugged in here. Now let's plug in the aux looking cable, which is your WR or wired remote plug. Got that plugged in there as well. Get our antenna adapter plugged in. So really at this point, we're ready to start pushing everything back in the dash and getting it off to the side just so the radio can seat and sit flush in there. Now for the steering wheel controls, this panel's super easy to pop off. One Phillips right in the middle. It kind of goes to that post there. Once the Phillips comes out, it just clips all the way around. We popped it down. We fed our steering wheel control wire up in there. So we have black, then we have a white. Now the white, per the instructions with pack, the white needs to connect to red with the yellow stripe. And it says to actually cut it, don't just splice into it. It says to cut it and we'll insulate that end. And then we put wire on wire and crimp that together. And then the red black wire, which is the other pin, that needs to go to our ground. That does not need to be cut. And we put a hole through that and we'll just quickly solder onto that. So that's your connections. That's all we have to do up underneath the steering column. This harness here, this gray guy, the 2 middle wires, and again we're working on the red with the yellow stripe and red with the black stripe. Now before we totally commit to getting the radio in, let's double check everything's working here. We want to double check steering wheel controls. We want to double check that everything's booting up and sounding correctly. All right, everything seems to be working great. Perfect. Okay. With that all done and ready to go, let's go ahead and get the radio mounted up. All right, that's about it for the install today. Everything went in nice and smooth. A little bit of effort involved, especially when you're cutting the sub dash and modifying your vents, but if you can do that, follow along the instructions in our video, should be able to do that at home. If you like what you saw, be sure to hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe. We post great content on the channel all the time, and we will see you in the next video.